The repair crew reached the North Crimean Canal expecting to rebuild a bridge. They never got to lift the first steel beam. What happened at that crossing near the village of Rozdolne wasn't a single strike on a single span. It was a trap that closed in 2 moves, and the second move is the one Moscow didn't see coming until the machinery meant to fix the damage was already burning on the embankment. This is the fight for Crimea now, and it no longer looks like the war people think they're watching. For years, the question was whether Ukraine could ever threaten the peninsula Russia annexed in 2014. The answer arriving this summer isn't a tank column or a beach landing. It's a bridge that used to carry Russian ammunition and fuel, sitting in the water in pieces, with the tools sent to save it destroyed on top of it. It's the 5th of July, a little under 2 weeks since that second strike, and the peninsula still hasn't gotten its rail line back. This is Professor Alex, and if you want the version of this war that follows the logistics instead of the headlines, take 1 second to subscribe, because that's the story I follow here. Now let me take you back to the canal. The bridge itself was never famous. It crosses the North Crimean Canal near Rozdolne, on the rail line that runs from the Kerch Strait side of the peninsula out toward Jankoy and beyond. Unglamorous, a working structure, and that's exactly why it mattered. Russia's whole position in southern Ukraine leans on a small number of these unremarkable crossings, because there aren't many ways to move heavy freight onto Crimea and out again. The Kerch Bridge, damaged more than once since 2022, runs at reduced capacity under heavy guard. The ferry line that used to pick up the slack was knocked out last year, so the rail spans over the canal weren't decoration, they were part of the skeleton. Ukraine seems to have understood that the skeleton is easier to break than the muscle. Here's how it actually unfolded. Overnight into June 18th, drones went after the road bridge at Rozdolne first, and part of it came down onto the railway running below. Think about the economy of that for a second. 1 strike, 2 structures crippled, because the collapse of one buried the other. Over the following nights, the rail bridge itself took more hits, the track was torn up, and by June 22nd, the monitoring channels tracking Crimea were reporting that traffic on that section had stopped entirely. Then came June 23rd, and the line Ukraine's Special Operations Forces used when they announced it has a certain cold humor to it. The railway bridge over the North Crimean Canal, they said, no longer exists. The first one's gone. The first one. Sit with that phrasing. Not, a bridge is down. The first one. That's a unit counting its way through a list. But the part that turns this from a demolition into something sharper is what happened between the strikes. After the span dropped, Russia did the obvious thing. It sent railway repair equipment to the site to start restoring the crossing. That equipment didn't move in secret. Ukraine's Special Operations Forces work alongside a resistance network inside occupied Crimea, ordinary people who watch roads and rail yards and report what rolls past. Those spotters flagged the arrival of the repair machinery, and once it was in position, a second strike came in and hit the repair equipment together with what was left of the bridge. That's the maneuver, not the crossing, the repair, because a broken bridge is a delay. A broken bridge with its repair crew and repair machinery destroyed on top of it is something closer to a sentence. You haven't just taken the structure offline, you've made the act of fixing it dangerous, and you've told every engineering unit in the theater that showing up to a damaged span is its own kind of exposure. The message isn't, we can hit your bridges. The message is, we're watching what you send to save them. I want to be careful here because the loud version of this story going around gets the drama in the wrong place. You'll see it framed as Ukraine lying in wait for some military train to roll across and then dropping the span underneath it. That's not what the reporting shows, and it's worth saying plainly, because the real sequence is more revealing than the invented one. Nobody caught a loaded train mid-crossing. What Ukraine did was let Russia commit resources to the repair. They're the machinery, the crew, the assumption that the site was safe enough to work, and then struck that commitment. That's not a movie ambush. It's a logistics ambush. And logistics is where this entire war has quietly moved. So step back from the one bridge because Rozdolne is a single node in something wider. Through June, Ukrainian forces went after crossing along the seam between occupied Kherson and Crimea. The Chonhar Bridge struck and struck again. The Henichesk crossing toward the Arabat Spit hit and shut. The Perekop, Armyansk corridor, where one strike caught a column and Ukraine's Da Vinci Regiment said it destroyed up to 50 military vehicles loaded with ammunition and fuel bound for the Zaporizhia front. Spans over the canal near Preobrazhenka and Mern, a crossing near Stavki. Not one dramatic blow, a methodical closing of doors, one exit at a time, until the peninsula's connections to the mainland shrank to a short and watched list. And running underneath the bridge campaign is the other half of the pressure, the one that produced the number you've probably seen. Robert Brovdy, call sign Magyar, who commands Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, said in the second week of June that Russian military cargo traffic along the R-280 highway, the land route Russia rebranded the Novorossiya highway, had fallen by 71% over the previous 2 weeks. That's the road campaign, the swarms of mid-range drones hunting trucks along the corridor from Rostov-on-Don down toward Simferopol. Not the bridges, the trucks. 2 separate pressures aimed at the same throat. Cut the rail, hunt the road, and suddenly there's no clean way to move heavy freight onto the peninsula at all. Now watch what that does to the ground, because this is where it stops being a map exercise and starts being real. By late May, before the bridge campaign even peaked, occupied towns were already showing the strain. Footage out of Melitopol and Mariupol showed fuel prices climbing and lines stretching at filling stations. The Russian-appointed governor of Sevastopol admitted stations in the city were running dry, with diesel only turning up now and then. Petrol got rationed by coupon. Reports put the price of fuel in Sevastopol up around 50% over the average across Russia. And then, as the June strikes landed, gasoline sales to civilians were suspended outright in parts of the peninsula, at the height of the summer tourist season, which, for occupied Crimea, is one of the few pieces of its economy that still breathes. Think about the position that puts Moscow in. Crimea is supposed to be the trophy, the settled question, the place Russian families vacation to prove the annexation is permanent and normal. And this summer, the trophy is rationing fuel, canceling children's sporting events through September, shutting summer camps to new bookings, dimming street lighting, and cutting the hours of shops and cafes in Sevastopol for safety. The governor framed it as protecting people. Read it the other way, and it's an occupation quietly conceding it can't guarantee the basics of a normal season. Ukraine's defense minister, Mikhailo Fedorov, put the strategy in one sentence that's been repeated for a reason. Crimea, he said, is going to become an island. And that word does a lot of work, because an island isn't conquered. An island is cut off, starved of what it needs to function, made expensive and slow to hold. You don't have to storm it. You have to isolate it until holding it costs more than it's worth. Which brings us to the money. And this is the part I keep coming back to, because it's the part that should worry planners in Moscow more than any single bridge. Look at the exchange rate on these weapons. The anti-bridge drones Ukraine has been using on crossings like Chonhar and Henichesk reportedly run under $50,000 apiece. The cruise missiles Ukraine once needed to take out a bridge like Chonhar back in 2023, Storm Shadow, Scalp, cost around $2 million each. So the tool that used to be scarce, precious, rationed, and dependent on Western permission has been replaced by something Ukraine builds itself for a 40th of the price. And the drones hunting trucks on the highway are cheaper still, cheap enough that they win the math even against the missiles and heavy anti-aircraft shells Russia burns trying to swat them down. When the thing destroying your bridge costs less than the shell you fire to stop it, you are losing the exchange before the strike even lands. That's the shift almost nobody priced in. For years, the ceiling on Ukraine's ambitions in Crimea was Western hardware, how many missiles would arrive, and whether Kyiv would be allowed to use them where it wanted. That ceiling is coming off, not because more missiles showed up, but because Ukraine stopped needing them for this job. It scaled a domestic drone industry to the point where it can run a sustained campaign against an entire peninsula's logistics on its own budget and its own decisions. The dependency that shaped 3 years of this war is thinning out in real time, and it's producing results the earlier, bloodier approach couldn't. Remember the summer of 2023, the counteroffensive that was supposed to drive south, cut the land bridge, and put Crimea within reach? It ground down in minefields and cost enormous casualties and never reached the coast. The goal that offensive failed to achieve with brigades and armor, isolating the peninsula, is now being approached with drones and spotters and a target list, at a fraction of the human cost. Former U.S. Army Europe Commander Ben Hodges has argued for a while that the way to Crimea runs through isolation first. Cut the road to Jankoy, drop the bridges, and make it impossible for Russian forces to stay. That's not a slogan anymore. That's a description of June. But I don't want to hand you the triumphant version and walk away, because the honest picture has a harder edge, and you deserve that instead of a highlight reel. A bridge is not gone forever because someone films it collapsing. Russia has rebuilt damaged crossings before. It has engineers, it has steel, it has every incentive to restore these lines. The reason the repair strike at Rozdolne matters so much is precisely that repair is the real contest here. Not whether Ukraine can drop a span, but whether Ukraine can keep dropping it faster than Russia can raise it back up, and whether hitting the repair crews makes Russia hesitate to send them. This is a race now. Destruction versus reconstruction, measured in nights. And races can turn. There's also the limit that even Bravdi himself named. He called the highway campaign effective and then, in the same breath, said it wasn't a full blockade yet. That yet is doing honest work. A 71% cut in military cargo is severe, but 71% is not 100, and the land corridor doesn't have one narrow choke point the way Kherson did in 2022, when the Dnipro bridges made the Russian position on the West Bank impossible to supply and forced a withdrawal. The parallel people reach for is that Kherson retreat. The difference is the geography. The land bridge is wider and more forgiving than a river crossing. Strangling it is a grind, not a single decisive cut. And Russia gets a say. Moscow can push repair harder, disperse its convoys, move more at night, thicken its air defense over the crossings, or answer with its own strikes elsewhere. And it has been answering, hitting Ukrainian cities and energy through the same weeks. This isn't a one-way collapse. It's a contest of adaptation, and the side that iterates faster wins the summer. Right now, that's Ukraine. Summer's end. Still, and this is where I land, something real has changed, and it's bigger than any one span over any one canal. For 9 years, Crimea sat in this war as a settled fact, a place Russia held and everyone else worked around. The assumption underneath every negotiation, every map, every frozen conflict prediction, was that the peninsula was simply Russia's to keep because taking it back was too hard. That assumption is what's cracking. Not because Crimea fell, it hasn't, and it may not for a long time, but because the cost of holding it stopped being fixed. Fuel that has to be rationed, a rail line that dies faster than it heals, repair crews that have to wonder whether showing up to a broken bridge means becoming the next target, a tourist season the occupation can't quite deliver. Every one of those is a small tax, and Ukraine has found a way to keep raising the tax for a few $1,000s a strike. That's the thing the loud coverage misses when it turns this into a story about one dramatic train on one dramatic bridge. The drama was never the crossing. It was the repair equipment burning beside it, the moment Russia learned that fixing the damage is now part of the battlefield, and that the resistance watching the tracks will call in the engineers as readily as the trains. A war fought over who controls the rebuilding is a different war than the one that started in 2022. Quieter, cheaper, and, for the side that has to hold the ground, far more exhausting. So here's what I keep turning over as I watch the pieces of that bridge sit in the canal near Rozdolne, 2 weeks on and still not repaired. For years we asked whether Ukraine could ever take Crimea back by force. Maybe that was always the wrong question. Maybe the real one is quieter and harder for Moscow to answer. Not whether the peninsula can be stormed, but whether, strike by strike and repair by ruined repair, it can simply be made too expensive to keep. What's a trophy worth when you have to ration the fuel just to hold it? This is Professor Alex. I'll see you in the next one.